we've got, well, you have to describe it as an odd alliance in the Senate. John McCain, Republican, and Elizabeth Warren, on the left of the Democrat Party, they've teamed up. They want to break up the big banks. They want to separate traditional banking from investment banking. Senator Angus King of Maine, now he is an independent. He supports this suggestion. He wants to break up the big banks. Senator, thanks for joining us this morning. Pleasure to see you, sir.
Hey, thank you for being there. You're right. This is a political odd marriage, if you will, when you have John McCain, Elizabeth Warren, and me, and also Maria Cantwell on the same bill.
Now, do you want to, if we get this, if this bill is successful, I know it's very long odds, but if it was successful and you went ahead and you break up the big banks, that puts Dodd-Frank and that whole mess of reform, that puts it right out the window, doesn't it? Because you're breaking up the bank. You're reforming them by breaking them up.
Well, my solution has always been a structural change rather than a regulatory change. I've never been a big fan of Dodd-Frank, in part because a lot of those regulations are falling on smaller banks that had nothing to do with the crisis 5 years ago, and yet they're being burdened with literally 3 feet of regulations. I think we ought to talk about a structural change, and what we're talking about is returning to what the law was for 70 years, and that is, if you want to be a banker, be a banker. If you want to be a swashbuckling capitalist and investment banker, do that. But they shouldn't be under the same roof, and they shouldn't be implicitly or explicitly supported by the taxpayers.
Right. If you got your way and the big banks were split up, then I, as a taxpayer, would not be on the hook if the investment side of the banking business went belly up. I think that's correct to say, isn't it? I'm taken off the hook. I've got no risk.
Yeah, you've got it. That's the whole idea. We want banking to be boring again. And we don't want the taxpayers and the federal insurance and the bailouts and all that to go to support risky behavior. And I think it wasn't the sole cause of the crash in 2007, 2008, but it was certainly a contributor. And this was a law that protected us for, as I say, 70 or 80 years. I think it got whittled away through regulatory changes in the 80s. Then it was repealed in the late 90s. It was a mistake, and I think we should go back to the law that worked so well for us.
Now, the 2 huge pieces of legislation which were successfully passed in President Obama's first term were Obamacare and then Dodd-Frank. They were massive pieces of legislation, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of what appear to be unworkable rules. Are you in the camp that says repeal both of them, get rid of both of them, because that legislation did not work?
No, I'm not on that. I'm not on that camp on the Affordable Care Act, because I think it's so important to provide more broadly based insurance to more people. I just don't see how you can argue that people should be going without health insurance, and we've got to find a way to do that. I think Obamacare did that. I think it perhaps has been overly regulatory in its process, and in fact, you know, that's why the White House said we're not going to do this employer mandate next year. I think that was a wise decision. I think they underestimated the problems of regulation, and I'm hoping they're going to go back to ground zero and make it much simpler. That's a message I've been sending the White House from the very beginning. I support the law, but not this mountain of regulation. Okay. Dodd-Frank, that's another issue. I do think, you know, the structural way is much better, and we really particularly need to focus on the burden of regulation that Dodd-Frank is applying to smaller banks. It's unnecessary, it's burdensome, it's affecting credit, it's expensive, and I just don't think it makes sense.
All right, sir, you're an independent in the Senate. We thank you very much for joining us, joining that alliance of the left and the right, the Republicans and the Democrats. Thanks for joining us, Senator King. We appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Glad to be with you.